The body was discovered at dawn. George Wilson, the village's old shepherd, lay face down in the woods, his coat soaked with dirt. His sheepdog sat beside him, whimpering softly, nudging his arm as if trying to wake him. But George would never wake again. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting broken shadows across the ground. The villagers gathered, murmuring in hushed voices. The air was thick with the damp scent of earth, laced with a faint metallic tang, the unmistakable smell of blood. "This doesn't look like an accident," Officer Roberts muttered, frowning at the frail body before him. "You mean?" Someone's voice dropped to a whisper. "Murder?" The word struck like a stone into a still pond, sending ripples of unease through the crowd. It had been years since something like this had happened in the village. And now, the silence was broken, and nearly every gaze turned in the same direction. Gabriel Wolfe, the man who had vanished 15 years ago, only to return now, with a child by his side. I stood among the crowd, my fingers trembling slightly. A chill crept up my spine, not from the morning breeze, but from the certainty that his return would be anything but simple. "Beth?" A familiar voice pulled me back to the present. Frank, my husband, stood beside me, his expression steady, but with an edge of scrutiny. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, both a reassurance and a warning. "Are you all right?" he asked. I forced a nod, but my gaze was already drawn to the edge of the gathering, where Gabriel stood, his posture unchanged from years past, but his presence weighed with time. He was looking at me, his eyes dark with something unreadable. And I couldn't look away. 15 years ago, he had kissed me beneath the oak tree, promising to take me away. But he left instead. I thought that chapter of my life had been buried under years of quiet routine. But now, here he was again, bringing a child, bringing questions, bringing back all the unfinished pieces of a past I had tried to forget. "How does he dare to come back?" Melissa, standing nearby, whispered, her voice laced with suspicion. "After everything, you remember, don't you?" Of course, I remembered. Gabriel had never been the village's favorite. He was rebellious, distant, always pushing against the invisible rules that held this place together. No one had ever truly understood why he left all those years ago, and now he was back, and George Wilson was dead. Gabriel didn't flinch under the weight of the villagers' stares. He stepped forward, his son beside him. The crowd tensed, bracing for whatever he might say. "Gabriel," Officer Roberts spoke, his voice edged with caution. "When did you return?" "Last night," Gabriel answered, his voice low, steady. "Any witnesses?" Gabriel's brow furrowed slightly. He glanced at the boy beside him. "My son, Leo. He can confirm it." The villagers exchanged glances. The air grew heavier. "Did you have any problems with George Wilson?" Roberts pressed. A brief pause. Then Gabriel shook his head. "No. But he's dead," Melissa interjected sharply. "Right after you returned." Gabriel's gaze swept over the crowd before settling on me. And in that moment, my breath caught. Was he searching for something? Expectation? Or a plea? I didn't know if I could trust him. 15 years ago, I had believed in him completely, only to be left with a broken dream. And now, here he was again, dragging all his mysteries back with him. "I didn't kill him." Gabriel's voice was calm, but there was something unshakable in it. "But if you're looking for someone to blame, maybe you should ask yourselves, what did George know?" A hush fell over the crowd. What was he implying? George Wilson. What secret had he uncovered? My heartbeat quickened. Gabriel might not be the murderer, but he knew something we didn't, and I. It was time to dig up the truths buried beneath the years. The night fog wrapped around the village like ghostly fingers. The moon cast fractured shadows along the narrow paths. At the edge of the forest, the police had cordoned off the crime scene. But no one dared to go too close. Too many secrets were buried in this village, and George's death was just another blood-stained warning. "What are you thinking?" The voice behind me was familiar. I didn't turn. "Are you hiding something?" A pause. Then Gabriel murmured, "That depends on how much you really want to know." "What did George discover?" I demanded, meeting his eyes. His stare was dark, unreadable. "Do you really want to know?" I held my breath, and then he spoke. 15 years ago, we missed the truth. But George, he found it. 15 years ago, Eileen Carter vanished. She had been the most beautiful girl in the village, the one everyone thought would marry into wealth, live a perfect life. But one day, she was gone, without a trace. People said she eloped. Some whispered that she had loved the wrong man. Others claimed she had run from a terrible secret. But Gabriel's return had shattered those stories. "Eileen didn't run away," he said, his voice as quiet as the wind through the trees. "Then where is she?" Gabriel looked toward the darkened woods, his expression unreadable. "She's buried here." A chill shot through me. "What did you say?" He turned to me, his gaze locking onto mine. "George found her body." I sucked in a breath, my fingers cold as ice. "George was going to expose the truth," Gabriel continued, his voice grave. "But someone couldn't let that happen." And suddenly, I understood. George hadn't been killed randomly. He had been silenced. There was someone in the village, someone who had always remained in the shadows. The old hunter Jack had been George's closest friend. He was a man of few words, but the only one who had seen Eileen the day she disappeared. "She was afraid," Jack admitted, lighting his pipe. "She said she found out something she shouldn't have." I swallowed hard. "What did she know?" Jack scanned the empty road before leaning in, voice low. "She knew who truly controlled this village." A sickening weight settled in my stomach. This village had never been as innocent as it seemed. There had always been someone pulling the strings, someone hiding behind the carefully maintained facade. Eileen had discovered the truth, and for that, she had to disappear. Just like George. In the village mayor's office, I found George's final notes. "If anything happens to me, go to Eileen's mother." Eileen's mother had been lost in madness for years, always whispering to the empty air, waiting for a daughter who would never return. But when I stood at her doorstep, she looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes were clear. "You know, don't you?" she rasped. "What are you talking about?" My heart pounded. She exhaled a shaky breath. And then she said a name I knew all too well. I froze. No, it couldn't be. When morning came, the village was bathed in pale light. Police sirens faded into the distance as the real killer was led away. Gabriel stood beside me, watching. "You won," he murmured. I didn't answer, because neither of us had won. The darkness in this village had never truly disappeared. It had only been buried deeper. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. George's murder was only the beginning. What was the real truth behind his death? Who was the real villain 15 years ago? Click the link below to uncover the full story. Immerse yourself in the lies, betrayals, and the chilling pursuit of justice. Read, listen to Broken Country now.